Capturing the imagination of the art of possibilities through music is something that energizes Heather Hutchison to get out of bed every morning. She's a blind singer and songwriter who uses her platform and her talents to unify the world through the power of music and advocacy for those with disabilities and beyond. She's got a new memoir entitled Holding On by Letting Go, where she details her life's journey as a disabled musician and advocate for inclusion, diversity, and equity. She's also got a new album entitled If I Could. She joined me this week to have an inspiring and thought-provoking conversation about music, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we can all work towards creating a more inclusive and welcoming environment for everyone to thrive. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Take a minute to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn all about your life's journey this afternoon. Thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Heather, I know that you use your gift of song and music to do some important advocacy work. So I'm wondering if we can dive into our conversation at that launching point this afternoon.
Absolutely. For sure. So I'm a singer, songwriter, and author, and I feel really fortunate that I get to use my voice and in those kind of two platforms to do advocacy work, to bring awareness to, I think, two really important topics of disability as well as mental health, which I think we're talking about it more than ever, but I'm still not convinced that we're talking about it enough. So I really love that I get to, through my music and through my writing, I get to connect with so many amazing people like yourself and talk to so many great people and share my story and hopefully, bring some more of that into the light and, tear down some of that stigma around mental health and disability.
Yeah, absolutely, and I know you worked on that extensively through your memoir entitled "Holding On by Letting Go." So I'm wondering if you can tell me the intention or the message that you were hoping to deliver through your personal memoir as well.
For sure. So Holding On by Letting Go is details my life as a blind person in Canada and Latin America. And there's this coinciding theme of my struggles with my mental health throughout my life, which ultimately culminated in me being hospitalized for psychiatric care during the COVID-19 pandemic. So when I was writing my book, I really tried to keep in mind that so many people ask me, like, what's it like to be blind? And that's such a vague, like, huge question. How do you possibly answer that? Like, what's it like to be sighted? So I really tried to sit down and write out what it actually is like day to day. What are the struggles? What are the triumphs? What is really frustrating about it? What are the advantages? Because I think there are advantages. And as well, I think there's this lack of knowledge around hospitalization for psychiatric care and psychiatric facilities that really honestly scares people because we don't know, and what we don't know can can frighten us. And so I really wanted to strip away the mystery of what life is like as somebody with a disability, as well as what life is like behind those locked doors of a psychiatric facility, so that people can really understand if they're ever in a situation where they might not need to be there, or if they have a family member or a friend or a loved one that is going through something similar, because there's just not a lot of information out there. So I really wanted to bring some clarity to those two important, I think, important topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious to ask you, Heather, what sort of fulfillment do you get personally from your music? And tell me about the new album that you've released called If I Could. I'm curious to learn all about it.
So I started playing professionally when I was 16, and it's always been so thrilling to me, like even at that young age, to play a concert and have somebody come up to me afterwards and be like, I was going through such and such a really difficult situation, and this song really helped me. And it just, I think music really strips away the discomfort we have around differences, and it really creates this humanity, this human connection, that we are all so much more similar than we are different. So if I can help somebody through my experiences while I'm also helping myself, because I find writing music extremely cathartic and I always have, then that's hugely fulfilling for me. And my new album, If I Could, just came out at the end of January, and it really kind of details actually what the things that I was talking about in my book, more specifically my experiences around mental health care and being in the mental health system and what that was like. So it really it speaks to my former self, what I wish I had known when I was going through it. It speaks to the people we've lost to mental illness and the people who I think we can still help by talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Heather, I'm also curious to ask you about when you hear the phrase representation matters, what comes to mind for you?
Representation matters. I think that so often in society, in government, there are decisions being made about people in minorities without ever really consulting the people in those minorities. And that makes things just way more challenging for people who do have to live in certain circumstances. And so I think representation is so important. And I think we're starting to see a little bit more of that, but I would like to see so much more of it, so much more of people in minorities with disabilities, whatever it might be, represented in the mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Heather, I'm also wanted to go back to something you said earlier about connecting with people through music. It's a great way, I think, thing to share messages of hope and inspiration through music. So when you sing or talk to people from a motivational speaking perspective, what's the one message you hope people take away from your music, your writings, or when you have public speaking engagements?
I think that the big message, I think there's a couple. One of them I mentioned about music is that it brings us together and we realize how much more similar we all are than different. And I think there needs to be less of a divide because we all really do want the same things. And as well, I hope when people listen to my music or my speaking or read my writing, they realize just the strength of the human spirit. We're so much more resilient than we think we are. And if they're in a difficult situation and they don't know how they're going to get through it, I hope that they will just take away that you just put one foot in front of the other and you keep going. And eventually, it might not be tomorrow, it might not be the next day, but eventually things do start to get easier and they do start to feel lighter.
Yeah, and to that point, do you look at music as a mechanism for healing, joy, or prosperity? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think all of those things. I think music can make us feel so many different emotions. It's so closely tied to memory. You know, you listen to a song from a good time in your life and it just brings back all that joy. It can move us to look at some, really difficult situations in our own lives. I think music is I mean, it's the soundtrack to our lives for a better or worse way to put that. I think, yeah, it's just with us everywhere, and it evokes so many different emotions: hopefulness, joy, sadness, despair.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Heather, I'm also fascinated to ask you about your definition of an inclusive society for folks with disabilities, and what does that look like to you?
I think there's a lot of physical barriers that we face. Buildings aren't necessarily accessible, but I think even bigger than that is the mental roadblocks that we still face, that people still throw up in front of us. If people were willing to be more open mentally to inclusivity, instead of just having that as a buzzword, I think the physical stuff would just kind of follow. But I think we need to get to the point where people really are thinking of inclusivity as more than just this word that we like to talk about. I think we need to really start living that in society. So, whether that's hiring somebody with a disability, um, giving people a chance to prove themselves instead of assuming that you know what their life is like. Because I think a big problem is it's great. Empathy is great, and it's great to try and put yourself in somebody else's shoes. But for me, for example, if somebody starts imagining their life as me, so say they just wake up one day and they're blind, of course that's going to be scary and they're going to struggle to do basic things. But I just hope that inclusivity will start to encompass people, just meeting people where they're at and seeing them for the capable people who they are. Because as somebody who's had a disability my whole life, I've learned to live with it, and I've learned different ways of coping with it. So my experience is not going to be the same experience as somebody who just woke up one day and was blind. So I think really inclusion is meeting people where they're at and accepting their reality is not necessarily your reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Heather, as I shared with you, I also have cerebral palsy, and one of the mottos that I live my life by is that inclusion is the gateway to independence. Because when you include individuals with disabilities in the workforce and society, you also give them a sense of personal fulfillment, dignity, and a sense of belonging. So I can totally agree with you on that point. And I'm also curious to ask you, when you look at the barriers and gaps that exist when it comes to folks with disabilities, I'm curious, where do you have the most hope, and what frustrates you the most? I'm curious.
Good question. I think the most hope I have is through technology. I mean, it's so incredible, even from when I was a kid, just how much technology has changed. Because back when I was younger, we had to pretty much only use adaptive tech, which was incredibly expensive. And now so many programs, so many, computers, smartphones, they all have the accessibility features built in. So I think that's really promising to put us on a more equal playing field. Things that still frustrate me, I just have to say, societal attitudes. Like, I hope things are getting better, but some days it's really discouraging to, even read the comments online about that people make about people with disabilities and just see how far we still have to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also curious to ask you about your own sense of personal fulfillment, and how do you get the most personally fulfilled?
I think for me, fulfillment comes from, as you just said, feeling included, feeling like I have a purpose, and really feeling like I'm doing something every day to make the world a little bit better than how I found it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we both live in a great country of Canada. You live on the western coast of Canada, and I know you've also traveled to a whole bunch of different places. So I'm curious, one Canadian to another, what's the best part about living in Canada for you?
Good question. I think it's very diverse culturally, as well as, especially where I live, you can go skiing in the morning and go sit at the beach by in the afternoon. So I mean, how crazy is that we get to enjoy so many different natural wonders all in one place?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you and your partner Jordan like to spend some time together. So tell me, when you're not working anymore, how do you sort of let your hair down and sort of find your own sense of togetherness with Jordan? I'm curious.
We tend to play a lot of music together. We're both musicians. We actually met in the recording studio, so that's both kind of work and fun. We like to spend a lot of time out in nature, enjoying the I live on Vancouver Island, so enjoying all the nature. We both really love paddle boarding, kayaking, in the winter watching Netflix or whatever. Just um hanging out at the end of a long day, catching up, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So since you brought it up, I'm curious, what's your favorite Netflix guilty pleasure? I'm curious.
My Netflix guilty pleasure. That's hard. I haven't actually seen anything that I've like loved recently on Netflix. I love like the crime documentaries and things like that. Sometimes I worry that like if somebody saw my Netflix history, they'd think I was like a murderer or something because I love like the all the unsolved mysteries type content.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Before I went into journalism, Heather, I contemplated going to law school because I wanted to be a judge, right? So, but I found out that journalism school was a lot shorter, so journalism school won. So there you go.
Yeah,
But
understandable.
yeah, absolutely. And my final question for you this afternoon has to do with your own personal and professional legacy and how you may want that to be defined.
I think personally and professionally, I kind of hope for the same thing. I hope to remind people that they're not alone. I hope to make people feel like they're included, that they matter, that their voice matters. And as I said earlier, just to leave the world, to do one thing, at least one thing every day to leave the world a little bit better than I found it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Heather, I really enjoyed our time together and learning all about your story today. And I'm curious to ask you finally, if people want to get connected with you, Heather, what's the best way they can do that?
Absolutely. They can visit my website at www.heather-hutchison.com, Hutchison. And on there, there's links to my music. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, basically anywhere you listen to music. My book is on Amazon, Audible, etc. And there's also links on there to all my social media accounts. So it'd be great to connect with anybody on social media, as well as to my mailing list if people want to find out more information about my music and my books and things like that, and when new things are happening.
Fantastic. Well, I know how busy of a schedule you keep, and I want to thank you for carving out a few minutes to talk to me about music, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Your work in the space and time on my behalf is most appreciated, Heather, and I want to thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.